As I mentioned on the Daily Objective that just wrapped up, I'm not very familiar with John Mearsheimer. Mostly, I see his name mentioned in the chat when people ask me when are we going to do a show about him. Uh, Luckily for us, Piers Morgan really scrapes the bottom of the barrel of humanity when he looks for his guests, and John Mearsheimer is to be found there. Yeah, we he had him on, and now we're going to talk about it. The whole thing is, well, you'll see what the whole thing is. But yeah, we have some comments. As soon as we schedule this, we already had comments in the chat. Best Monster said, "Will you guys also talk about Gabor Mate? He's a despicable human being." The problem is, so many despicable human beings, so little time. We only have 12 shows a week, so we can't go through all of them, but we will keep going through many of them because I think many of them get away with too much unchallenged. And if you want to see unchallenged, look at what passes in Piers Morgan's mind as challenging this guy. Welcome to the reality show. I'm going to go quickly around and ask if any of you have opening comments. And if not, we'll just start playing it. We're going to go through as much of it as we can. We don't need timestamps. Everything that comes out of this person's mouth is nauseating. So we'll just go as far as we can go. Jonathan, any initial comments?
He's a piece of shit.
Agree. Michael?
No disagreement there.
Daniel?
I thought it's Mearsheimer.
I don't know. I'm not sure I pronounced it right. That's but yeah, I'm definitely in agreement with Jonathan. I don't know how, not sure about Daniel's comment, how to pronounce the name, but let's find out why he's a piece of shit. There's information behind that, which he gives us here on Piers Morgan. Let's start watching.
So while I'm setting it up, we start about 2 minutes in already because the first part is mostly just, recapping and everything. So let's go.
First of all, that Israel has a right to defend itself against Hezbollah.
Sure. I mean, who would disagree with that?
So in terms of what they've been doing in the last week, does that all fall under a reasonable self-defense?
Well, the question you really want to ask yourself is, where does this all lead? The fact is the Israelis have a huge problem here, and that is that as long as they continue the war in Gaza, Hezbollah has said that it will continue to fire rockets into northern Israel. And Israel has no intention of ending the war in Gaza. And as a result, Hezbollah has no intention of ending the firing of rockets and missiles into northern Israel. And the Israelis want to do something about this because approximately 60,000 people have been displaced from the northern part of Israel to the central part. And the Israelis want to move them back because this has all sorts of economic consequences. And more generally, they want to deal with the Hezbollah problem once and for all. So the question is, how do they do that? And they don't want to invade. That's quite clear. And absent invading Lebanon, what they're trying to do is massively punish Hezbollah and Lebanon and get them to throw up their hands. This is a coercion strategy. And you have to ask yourself whether you think the Israelis are capable of coercing Hezbollah to surrender to Israeli demands, i.e. stop firing rockets and missiles into northern Israel. And there is no evidence, no matter how hard Israel hits Lebanon, that Hezbollah is going to stop firing rockets and missiles into northern Israel. So it doesn't look like Israel's strategy is going to work.
The remarkable
Right.
attack
Okay.
that they
Yeah.
launched.
Let's pause there. It's interesting that he answers the kind of abstract question: does Israel have a right to defend itself? With yes, and then when he gets to that one point of look, Israel is under daily attacks from Hezbollah, he says that what Israel is doing now is a coercion strategy. He couldn't answer the question about the pagers exploding in the pockets of terrorists. So, the most targeted operation the world has ever seen. He can't even say that that is a a correct way of doing things. So he starts off, he's easing us into seeing who he is, but that alone was not very easy. Jonathan, your thoughts?
Well, the first thing that jumped into my mind when Pierce asked him if it's reasonable is why, like, if we had James here, who is a lawyer, witnesses, when they testify, it has to be their field of expertise. And the question was a moral question. And this person is not a philosopher, as far as I'm aware. So why is he in a position to answer what is reasonable, what is moral, what is immoral? What does he know about morality? I didn't understand that. I don't think he is a philosopher. Perhaps you can correct me. And yes, he states that Israel has a right to defend itself, yet doesn't matter what Israel does, it is immoral, which, again, I wish they would define their terms.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't need to be a philosopher to have a view of morality, and clearly he does. And we see where he's coming from, even if he doesn't make it explicit. Michael.
Well, it's interesting. He poses the question, where does this all lead? This being the immediate situation. But the immediate situation is a terrorist organization who has declared their intent to annihilate Israel. That's a fact on the ground today that is pointing on between 100 and 150,000 missiles and other firearms against Israel. And he's asking, where does this all lead? And he's doing it. And by the way, we get caught in this a lot when we get into these discussions, because we answer the direct question specifically. But if you actually listen to what he asks, where does this all lead? It leads to the annihilation of Israel. That's Hezbollah's stated purpose. In fact, right now, that's pretty much their only purpose. And we can all talk about the baloney about how they spend 5 or 7% of their funding on schools and hospitals locally, and they help the Lebanese population. Sure, if you want to believe that a government that uses 5 to 7% of their money to help people is a legitimate government, believe that. I don't need to talk to you. But the issue is from the baseline, this man is corrupt. And you can tell how he does it. What he ends up changing to this coercion crap. And I love the notion that after a week, what Israel's doing isn't working. Well, I'm certainly, in my career, I certainly would give up if things don't work for me in a week, I would give up. According to him, he can tell, he is so intelligent that after a week, Israel's not working. It's working. It's absolutely working. It's remarkable. The fact that Hezbollah has not been able to fire substantial numbers of missiles against Israel, and the fact that there are so few so little Israeli damage, and I believe maybe 1 or 2 casualties. I'm not entirely sure the number right now. And the fact that over 1,500 Hezbollah operators are out or dead, or both, and another 500, mostly terrorists, are dead, or at least people that weren't terrorists but just happened to have a missile pointing at Israel in their house are dead. We can go on, but the whole thing is just swimmingly beautiful and professionally delivered, and it's completely fallacious and frankly, obviously dishonest.
Yeah, we mentioned a few times that some source in the U.S. government says Israel has set Hezbollah back 20 years, which of course is not enough, but it's a lot. In a week, it is super impressive. Somebody in the chat says, dude, he has 180 IQ. Well, you know what? Then I guess he has to be right. Maybe we should call it a show here.
There are
Daniel.
psychopaths with very high IQs.
Yeah.
What does that have to do with anything?
Yeah, and again, that sort of thing, when it comes to expertise, there's nothing wrong with relying on experts, but experts should have an ability to bring some new perspective when it comes into the conflict. You should learn, like, if you watch this interview and he is an expert on something, you should learn something new. He should be able to bring up something that you haven't heard before. But the more I watch this, supposed experts, the more I see there's not, like, he repeats stuff like open air prison, apartheid, genocide, the ICJ plausible case for genocide. He misinterprets everything. and he brings up these things which again you wouldn't use. Like again, like words have a definition, even when it comes to sort of like legal standards. They have definitions, and sort of just throwing these words around. Again, what sort of expert? And so when it comes to sort of like what he's supposed expert on, and this is from Wikipedia, he is a proponent of, I think he came up with the idea of offensive realism, which is sort of like a new theory of politics, basically. I'm not going to talk about that specifically because, again, I'm not an expert, so I won't be able to bring something new to that. But I can talk about what he said on the show. And what he said is something I've seen a lot, that sort of amoral view of the war. Like, there are no good guys and bad guys. It's sort of just, yes, Israel can defend itself. Yes, Hezbollah will respond. But again, that's sort of like, you don't get any value from it. Like, he doesn't say what is the right thing to do. He's only talking about, sort of like automatic, well, this state will respond this way when this thing is acted upon them. And again, that sort of perspective on the world is, I mean, boring at the very least. Like, that sort of analysis, like, it's just, you just have huge hegemonies with, like, they all have certain interests and they will act on their interest. And yeah, it's like, okay, dude.
Yeah, I mean, when I was watching this, I thought for a professional intellectual, he does seem to be just repeating some of the most common pro-Palestinian talking points. I would have expected a bit more. We see a bit more even when we talk about Cheng. I don't know what he's saying, but he's at least shouting, and he's annoyingly somewhat entertaining. LF says, I tried watching this, but didn't have a sick bag nearby. We like to say we watch it so you don't have to, but unfortunately, we're about to play another clip.
On electronic devices, pagers, walkie-talkies, and so on, which appeared to impact on 3,000 or more members of Hezbollah, along with some civilians who were killed in the process. There's a big debate about whether that was lawful. The law is quite complex in that regard, in the sense that, for want of a better phrase, booby-trapping people through electronic devices, if you can't guarantee that they are enemy combatants but could also impact on civilians, then that could be a breach of international law. That could be a war crime. What do you think of that?
I think it was a war crime. I think that it was an indiscriminate way of attacking Lebanon or attacking Hezbollah. They had to know that lots of civilians were going to have those pagers and would be maimed or killed as a result. And even though, there is no question that Hezbollah fighters would die in the process or be wounded in the process, there was going to be, indiscriminate killing of lots of civilians. And I would say that that is an act of terror.
But Hezbollah doesn't give a damn about
all right.
Israeli
Yeah, we can pause there. I mean, look, we on this panel, I sometimes ask my co-panelists questions, and it's clear this is not a hardball interview. When I ask Jonathan, what do you think about this guy? That's a softball question. And yeah, Piers is really unbelievable. It's unbelievable the way he's asking these questions. And of course, John Mearsheimer just laps it up and says, yeah, this is an act of terrorism. The act of taking out individually terrorists who are the reason that Israel has any interest in Lebanon at the moment, because Israel doesn't ever start any kind of conflict with its neighbors, including Lebanon. It's just, they start firing rockets, or historically they go into Israel and kidnap some soldiers. That's how conflict starts there. So yeah, again, the very existence of Hezbollah is in order for there to be war, for Israel to be destroyed, and killing or hurting just specifically the terrorists of Hezbollah. According to this guy, it is a war crime and an act of terrorism. And you know, Jonathan, the thing with these guys is when they talk about Israel's what they call Israel's act of terrorism, they never talk about what Hezbollah or the Palestinians do as acts of terrorism. Those are acts of resistance.
Well, of course, they're killing Jews, so that's understandable, you know. I want to check the premises before we go to the specifics, because the whole premise is completely invalid. Pierce asks an invalid question. Do you think it's lawful or unlawful? There are no laws for war. There is no such a thing as laws and rules for war, because war is a situation when laws are no longer any use. That's when we go to war. And there is a fundamental difference that people, and I've spoken to a few people when I was in Georgia about this, foreigners, also they can't comprehend the fact that there is a fundamental difference between the defending side and the aggressor. The aggressor has no rights, and the defender has the rights. So you cannot say that it is an illegitimate act, or it's an immoral act of Israel to strike back, because we wouldn't have had this scenario unless Hezbollah, since October 8th, attacked Israel. So anything that happens to Hezbollah, any pager that's exploded and any civilian that's dead, is wholly the moral responsibility of the Lebanese people. And Israel can do whatever it sees necessary to protect its citizens, because Israel's moral obligation is not towards Piers Morgan or John, whatever his last name is, but towards me and the other Israelis. That's why Israel was founded, to defend ourselves against those who seek to destroy us. So the whole question is invalid. Therefore, the whole line of discussion that follows is illegitimate. And Israel is 100% moral to do whatever is necessary in Lebanon.
Somebody in the chat says, you guys are occupying. Yes, we are occupying space in your mind, rent-free, as they say, and you're better off for it. Thanks for watching. Keep watching, and you will be even better off. Enric says, you keep using the word indiscriminate. I don't think you know what it means. Yeah, I mean, the fact that he will say about something like that, that's so targeted, he would call that indiscriminate, while supporting Hezbollah, who's firing rockets all over the north of Israel, while supporting Hamas, who's killing any Jew that they can. That's special. Michael.
Yeah, I mean, this would be like taking a picture of a policeman shooting a criminal, or an alleged criminal, of course, and starting it with just the policeman sort of picking up a gun and shooting the criminal, as if there were nothing happened before that. And as Jonathan said, there's no rule, there's no law in war. This is absurd. I mean, this whole IJC thing, this whole notion that there's some rules. Who follows the rules of law? The U.S. bombed the heck out of every single enemy it had forever. Forever. That's how you win wars. And if there are citizens embedded within the population, that doesn't mean the terrorists get out of jail free card. It doesn't mean you can protect people by embedding. If that were the case, all the terrorists would do exactly what Hamas and Hezbollah are doing, which is embed themselves amongst the civilians, and then it would be impossible to follow this brilliant gentleman's, with his giant IQ's, idea that there should never be loss of civilian life. It's an absurd notion. You know, you need a perfectly laser targeted gun. Think about it. That didn't penetrate the person. The bullet would have to stop inside the person, lest it go through them and hit somebody else. It's absurd. And that's the level, but we should never get into a situation where we have to argue this level of absurdity. But it's the same thing as when I started. If you start the film with the cop apparently indiscriminately killing someone for doing nothing because you didn't watch the movie from the beginning, you're going to end up with this kind of ridiculousness. The last thing is that this was the reason that people like him are so upset about the pager situation, the beepers, the solar panels, and so on, is because this was one of the most exquisite military operations in the history of military. This is going down and will go down in the history books as probably the most precise, targeted, full-blown operation ever in the history of modern warfare and probably of non-modern, pre-modern warfare. And the people like him cannot stand it. The fact that there was so little collateral damage, and yes, there probably were 2 or 3 children who were killed in this. And by the way, Hezbollah has every intention of killing 2 to 3 million Israeli children if they can, indiscriminately, actually very discriminately. They want to kill Israeli children. Okay, so we all need to stop, I think, getting caught up in the minutia of it all and look at the things with a bigger picture. And obviously, this gentleman leads you down a perfectly great set of arguments, which are built on a house of lies and a house of false principles.
Thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says UN needs to remember it was not Israel who smashed into Gaza on motorcycles, taking hostages, committing outrageous. Yeah, the UN remembers. They remember, and they remember it fondly. Look, as I mentioned, tomorrow's daily objective will be about the UN. We're going to talk about some of the highlights or lowlights, but yeah, we are going to talk about how they're looking at this. But yeah, you know, everything you need to know about where the UN stands. You can look in the immediate days after October 7th, when some of us actually thought, you know, what Biden and Blinken were saying meant that the US is going to stand by Israel, but the UN didn't waste any time. You know, the Antonio Guterres immediately said this didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened after decades of occupation. Francesca Albanese immediately said that Israel is committing a genocide before any ground operation came, because she knew she had to set the tone for pro-Hamas propaganda. So yeah, stop hoping for anything. The only good thing that can happen with the UN is free countries leaving it, the US kicking it out of New York, and yeah, let these countries discuss among themselves how evil Israel is. Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, Michael mentioned about the children. Well, Hezbollah, well, that's the thing. Hezbollah is not targeting children because they're just sending the rockets, and whoever dies, it's good. You know, we've talked about I believe it's pronounced Mashdal Shams. I think I was corrected on that last time I talked about it. You know, again, that was Hezbollah rocket that hit it, that they tried to walk, they claimed the attack, and when they heard who was actually hurt in that attack, they tried to walk it back. But again, that's the way attack, and you know, whoever dies is good. Again, that's why whenever someone tries to make the claim that Israel uses human shields, Israel fundamentally cannot use human shields. Human shields only work if the attacker is less likely to attack you because civilians are present. Hamas and Hezbollah are more likely to attack if they know civilians are present. So again, that doesn't work. And you know, continue. Someone in the chat says we should try to understand him. Trust me, I've been trying to understand these people for a long time. That's sort of again, and you know, when the pager attack happened, we had an episode on that day, and I said this will really show that it's not about the ratios, it's not about any sort of proportionality. Israel just shouldn't defend itself, because again, this was in human history the most targeted attack that you ever had. It's gonna take a while to see something similar, and even Israel's action in both Gaza and Hezbollah have been the most targeted events in history, and they're still not good enough because it's not the standard. It's always about the fact that these countries just shouldn't defend itself, specifically free countries, because again, whenever you brought up, and I think Jonathan mentioned the idea of international law, something to realize: law has two parts of it. There's you know, the fact that you know what it is, you know, you have it written somewhere, you have it, you know, published somewhere, but there is also the enforcement part. Law, to actually meet the standard of law, needs to have some sort of enforcement. And when it comes to any sort of international laws, you have some international organizations. You have the criminal court, you have the international what is it, ICJ, Court of Justice, sorry. But when it comes to them, the biggest problem is it's only targeting the free nations, because the dictatorships don't show up. And again, when you have this sort of standard, and you know, when they brought up the case, you know, there's a plausible case for Israeli genocide. Well, the thing is, the other guys don't show up. The dictatorships who are actively committing genocide, that's what they try to do. They try to bring in China when it comes to Uyghurs. They didn't show up. So again, because of that, again, you'll only have the free nations being brought up there. You'll only have the more Western, the more liberal nations being brought up, and that's being used against them. It's always being any sort of, you know, any sort of like, we want to do better. And you know, there is some good in it when you want to make, you know, you want to bring some standard, some civilization into the sort of idea of international community. But at the end of the day, it's always being used only to say that the good nations are not good enough, and the bad nations are never brought up to any standard.
Yeah, I mean, a good version of it was having some sort of minimum entry requirements in terms of you know, respecting the rights of your own citizens. But yeah, that's absolutely not a requirement in the UN. Tom says in the chat, bear in mind that Islamic fanatics see no such thing as an innocent civilian. Yeah, that's true. Although they do talk about innocent civilians when they speak English at the UN. So and people unfortunately buy it. Thank you, Jonathan, for the super chat. Jonathan says, Jonathan is a style icon of ARCUK. Welcome back. Yeah, all right, let's with that, let's hear some more from John Mearsheimer.
Launches its rockets. So what's the difference?
Israel doesn't give a damn either about killing Palestinians in Gaza or killing civilians in Lebanon. The idea that Israel is going to great lengths not to kill civilians, and Hezbollah and Hamas are not doing that, is just not a serious argument. All you have to do is look at all the civilians that the Israelis have killed, both in Lebanon and in Gaza, and many more Palestinian civilians and Lebanese civilians have been killed than Israeli civilians. It's not even close.
That is true, but you could use the same argument, as Israelis have done, that in World War II, nobody questioned the volume of civilian casualties when the Allies went after the Nazis, for example, when we were carpet bombing cities and so on. When people use that analogy, what do you say to them?
Well, your argument is that because atrocities have been committed by the Allies in the past, there's nothing wrong with Israel murdering huge numbers of civilians in Gaza.
All right,
Well, that's not my
I'm
argument.
gonna pause
No,
there.
it's not.
I know it means we're not going to get through even a third of this, but that's fine. Again, I think it's I might be biased, but I think it's nicer to listen to us than to this guy. Yeah. So first of all, that last part is my favorite part. But before that, Jonathan, you talked about morality, and I think he kind of gives you a sense of his morality when he says more Palestinians died than Israelis. Well, you know, that what more do you need to know? It's a numbers game. Whoever kills more is the bad guy. And then when Pierce surprisingly gives a good question, a good analogy, which is the right one. You know, the Allies didn't care about innocent civilians in Dresden, in Hamburg, in Berlin. They bombed the hell out of those cities. And his response is, well, just because the Allies committed atrocities, does that justify it? So he considers winning World War II an atrocity,
Yes.
essentially. Jonathan.
Yeah, that shows you how evil he is. And he started by saying that it's not a serious argument that Israel is being very discriminate. And I agree that unfortunately Israel is way too discriminated, and I think this shows that it doesn't matter how discriminate Israel is, as we've seen with the Beeper attack. Even if we are 99, 90 or 95% very discriminate, that wouldn't satisfy this gentleman. So he wants 100% supposedly, right? Because how higher can you get from that? And 100% is obviously impossible. So his standards are impossible. His morality is impractical, therefore is crap, and we should throw it to the litter bin and say to this gentleman and Mr. Morgan that we do not subscribe to your broken, impractical, useless morality, but we are fully committed to defending ourselves, and we don't care what you're going to say. We don't care about the UN. We don't care about all your made-up courts and your made-up rules, because it's useless. It didn't do anything to the people of October 7th, to the women who were raped, the people who were murdered. These laws did absolutely nothing to help them. So why should we care? Why should we listen to you? Why should we entertain you? There's absolutely no rational reason to do that. And if Israel, it would have been a country that is acting selfishly as we want, we wouldn't have been here for after a year. So yeah, I think it shows how evil these guys are. They're just saying words. It's impossible what they're asking for, and they know it.
Michael.
Yeah, I think, and I think, the person who made the comment about how high his IQ is, it's perfectly fine to have a very high IQ. But if you start with a bunch of false propositions and axioms and foundations, then you end up with what he said, which as Razi pointed out, is fundamental to his belief that the Allies committed atrocities in World War II. The fact that Hitler invaded Poland and the Czech Republic and all of the places he invaded, and he killed 6 million Jews and another 4 or 5 million gypsies, homosexuals, et cetera, in the most industrialized death machine ever invented. This does not excuse, in his mind, let's be very clear about it. This does not excuse, in his mind, the Allies destroying Germany. Because Germany should be allowed to get away with what it did, and the Allies needed to pinpoint only the Nazis, forgetting, of course, the Nazis were democratically elected. According to him, the Allies should not have done what they did. They should have prolonged the war. They should have done only targeted killing, which would have, of course, led to a much longer war and devastation across the globe. But leave that alone, folks. Just understand where he's coming from. Let's go back one more time and to echo again what Jonathan said, because I think he hit the nail on the head. When someone declares that they are here to annihilate you, I believe in a morality of that you pull out a gun and you blow them away. You don't wait to see if they're serious. Because the statement, I'm going to kill you and your family and everybody around you, and you do not have the right to exist, is of sufficient magnitude to justify lethal force, full stop. We don't need to hold a court. Of course, Barack Obama would have us all bring these people to justice so he can investigate what their mental status was, because we think that normal people mentally say things. That's the Obama doctrine. We said it after our ambassador was killed in Lebanon. It is a ridiculous situation, and it can only lead to evil people taking over. And for people that believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which does include selfishness, because it's your life, it's your liberty, that's selfish. If you care about your life and your liberty, and your family's life and your liberty, and the children, your children's, then you have to understand that when someone is saying they are going to annihilate you, you should blow them away, else you are going to be dead. Israel did not do that. They have put up with Hamas and Hezbollah for far too long. The net result is that Hamas came in and killed 1,400 Israelis, plus the number that have died in the war. And they took hostages who they tortured, raped, etc. Hezbollah has been threatening Israel for a long time, and it's not just the current one. This is the third Lebanon war, effectively. And we didn't pay attention. We didn't take them seriously, and we didn't do anything about it. And what you have is the result. This man's belief system is anti-life. And when people believe in a belief system that's against life, you need to run away from them as fast as possible, regardless of their brilliance or supposed brilliance.
Yeah, a part of the interview we're not going to get to is when he explains why essentially Russia is not the bad guy in the war with Ukraine. Not a surprise, of course. He's more consistent there than some who pretend to support Ukraine and the Palestinians. Thank you, Bulmus, for the super chat. Bulmus says, I don't understand why Israel doesn't just drop out of the UN and just engage in direct diplomacy or through back channels. The UN only serves evil now. Yeah, I'd like to see that, but I'd also like to see other Western countries. First and foremost, the U.S. that not only hosts the UN, but also funds it. About a quarter of the funding of the UN comes from the U.S. So without that, they're gonna struggle as well. Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, his last comments. Well, first of all, someone in the chat says, would Ayn Rand have anything to say about Ukraine or any non-Jewish country? Well, she did talk about the US a lot since that was her country, but besides that, so he made a point. Yeah, he made a point about look at all the civilians killed, and that automatically. Again, whenever I hear from people like this, I want to ask, what is like a how do you expect the country to like defend itself? He said World War II, when it came to allies, was a war crime or were terrible atrocities. So I would just ask him, what do you like? What's the actual and you never get an answer to it. Like, what do you actually expect them to do? What do you want Israel to do? Like, tell me, give me. If they give me something, then we can discuss. Then there is some potential for discussion. But it's always, well, this is everything Israel is doing, and it's all wrong. But I won't tell you what they are supposed to do. So we're just gonna argue about this. It's similar to when you argue with like socialists, and it's like capitalism is every single nation that has ever existed, and socialism has never been tried. And it's like, okay, let's argue. What do you mean? Like, I there's nothing I can do here. Like, if I have to defend like every single thing there is, and you have no standard, you have no like point of reference, there is no discussion. And again, when I have to defend, in a sense, every single war that has been waged by a free nation or by a Western nation, and on the other side, there is nothing. That I have nothing to compare it to. Again, what are we arguing for? Because again, you can have some standards when it comes to the war. If you want to take the sort of like international rules of the war as the standard, sure, we can do that. Israel has been the closest to it's basically an impossible standard, but it has been closest to the impossible standard. And if it's not good enough, then yeah, no nation can ever defend itself if, again, that's your standard. But when it comes to, and that's what happens after that. When it comes to Palestinians, when it comes to Hezbollah, they can pretty much get away with everything. They will, even I think John Mearsheimer might put like symbolic statements like Israel has the right to defend itself, or he still considers what Hezbollah is doing a war crime. He might throw like symbolic gesture here and there. But if there is no actual push, if there is no actual nothing stopping, because again, Israel is being held back by international community, by basically United States either not wanting to support them, or UN trying to either going into the Security Council or even the General Assembly. Yet there is nothing like that against Hezbollah and the Palestinians. So again, you might dislike also what Hezbollah is doing, but there is no actual pressure against them, and there is only pressure against Israel. You are not being fair in any like even resembling way.
You've convinced me that we should hear some more from this guy.
Large
It's
numbers
an
of
argument. It's an
civilians in
argument. Well,
Lebanon.
to be clear, it's not my argument. It's an argument I hear a lot from the Israeli side, which is, why are you lecturing us when our ratio of combatants, terrorists to them and to me, but when they go after Hamas and they believe they're killing 2 Hamas terrorists for every civilian that's been killed, and that ratio stands comparison with any modern warfare?
I don't think you can look at ratios. First of all, I reject that ratio, but I don't think you have to look at ratios to make an assessment of whether or not the Israelis are acting according to the laws of war or not. If you look at what they're doing in Gaza, it's clear to me that it's a genocide, that they are actually trying to murder huge numbers of Palestinians and effectively drive the Palestinians out of Gaza. This is a clear case of a state, Israel, pursuing ethnic cleansing in Gaza. They want to drive the Palestinians out. They want to make Gaza unlivable. And in the process, they are murdering huge numbers of civilians. And this is why the International Court of Justice ruled this past January that there is sufficient evidence to make the case that the Israelis are plausibly committing genocide in Gaza.
What they would say is that they face an existential threat fueled by Iran from Hamas and Hezbollah right on their border, that neither Hamas nor Hezbollah make any pretense of presenting an existential threat to Israel. Hamas's spokesman, within days of the October the 7th terror attack, brazenly said, we want to keep doing this as much as we can. When you have an enemy so publicly and brazenly saying, we're going to commit terror attack after terror attack against you of that magnitude, what else do you do when those terrorists operate amongst civilians and build huge tunnels?
So I want to hear his answer to that, but I think we should comment on his previous answer first, because it's interesting how much stuff he says that contradicts other stuff he said. I don't think you have to look at ratios. I reject that ratio, but earlier he said more Palestinians died than Israelis, so that's why supposedly they're the victims here. And then he does say that Israel is trying to commit a genocide by killing. Genocide is killing people, and then he talks about they're trying to get Palestinians to leave. So are they trying to kill all the Palestinians? Are they trying to get them all to leave? Does it matter? Because it does and it doesn't. See, Jonathan, he's definitely a student of philosophy.
Absolutely, and it's a good example of why it's so important for us to learn philosophy in order to combat this. He's speaking in fundamental moral language. It's very important for us to recognize that. Watching this, I think he would make a great follow-up guest for Tucker Carlson, don't you guys think? After that National Socialist guy. I'm wondering if he thinks that the US in World War II was also committing a genocide. If any side.
He said we committed atrocities. He said that.
Yeah, so the US also committed a genocide, I suppose, but he wouldn't say that, I think, out loud. I think, and I doubt if he would really think that. I think it's a matter of when the Jews are engaged in warfare, that is where it gets illegitimate. According to him, he wouldn't go and give interviews about how the US is evil, or he did. Please correct me if I'm wrong. He said that it's clear to him. It's a clear case. It's clear as the day that this is genocide. What is the evidence? where's the proof? It's clear to him because he has 180 IQ, and we should just take his word for that. Piers seems to also take his word. So as far as I'm concerned, the onus of proof is on him. He hasn't proved anything. He just said that it's clear to him. I want to see the evidence. And you know what? I would say something rather controversial. Even if it was the case that Israel would have killed 100,000 Palestinians on the day after October 7th, it would have been moral. It would have been good. The faster the war is over is good. Whatever the military experts think is necessary to finish the war as quickly as possible. If it was 100,000 Palestinians, yes, good. As soon as possible, as little Israeli casualties as possible. That is the principle, and no matter what.
Yeah, not only do I agree, I think it would be more moral than what Israel is doing now. And in a sense, Israel is fighting the way it's fighting, I guess in large part to have those who hate Israel around the world not hate it, supposedly. We have a comment in the chat that says hundreds of thousands have been killed in Gaza. That's a very well-timed comment, because that is the essence of the anti-Israel propaganda. It doesn't matter what Israel does. The people who hate Israel will continue to do so, and will continue to just make up those numbers. So
if I may add, Razi, it is a moral crime on the Israelis and the military that sends our troops and sacrifices them for these horrible human beings who have allowed the Hamas to build tunnels under their houses. It is a moral crime to sacrifice our dear soldiers for these people. So that is where I would put my morality against the Israelis. We are being immoral because we don't do enough, and we sacrifice our soldiers to appease people like this professor, and that is heinous. It's evil.
Yeah, thank you, Laurisetto, for the super chat. Laurisetto says non-troll super chat. Thank you so much for the work you all do. Thanks. By the way, we very rarely get troll super chats. We get troll free chats, but we will gladly accept your money, trolls, if you want to put it behind your comments. PC says, no, hundreds of thousands have been fed by Israel in Gaza. Yeah, that is true. It's probably over 1 million. I don't know what the population is. I only have the Hamas numbers, which I don't really trust, but yeah, that's true. Michael.
Well, there are a couple of things. In a practical sense, first of all, just to show you how brilliant this man is, and I'm saying that facetiously, if Israel wanted to commit extermination of Gaza, just to use blunt words, since he likes to do that too, it would be done. You can see the power of Israel's army going on finally now. We never needed to send any troops in to go into tunnels to try to surgically dissect out people and get our hostages back. What we could have done was to carpet bomb Gaza back into the Stone Age, level it, make a parking lot out of it, and then rebuild it the way it should be built, which is the way it largely looked before Israel exited Gaza voluntarily and gave it to the Palestinians to take over and manage their own area back in 2005 and 6. And by the way, Israeli army actually forcibly removed Israelis from the area at that time. But from a practical point of view, if Israel wanted to demolish the population of Gaza, it would be done. It would have been done a long time ago. October would have finished and there would be nobody left in Gaza. Full stop. That's the power of the Israeli army. And you can see what's going on now in Lebanon if you have any question about that. The more important point, I think, is the one that Jonathan makes. And the U.S. and countries, unfortunately, with the viral infections of do-gooderism and the oppressed and the weak and the failures of the world rising, and the people that are successful becoming more and more guilty about the fact that some people's philosophy just doesn't work, and somehow that's our fault, us in the West. What has happened is that we don't fight wars anymore the way wars should be fought. The U.S. didn't do that after 9/11. The U.S. didn't do it against ISIS. these things dragged out forever because of some ridiculous notion that you have to be surgical. And in the case of this professor, it actually has to be 99.9% laser focused on just killing the actual active combatants. And I agree with Jonathan completely. That is a very quick path to your own death, because the rules have changed. You're walking into a lion's den and you're having a conversation with a lion who will listen to you for a while, but when his stomach growls, you're done. And that is what has happened in the world. And we sit and listen to these scholars, and most of them are professors, and they are completely morally bankrupt. And by the way, think about it, they're all on either salaries from the students that are paying for them, or they're on government handouts and subsidies. They've never created anything of their own. They've never invented anything. And they have the audacity to actually criticize the people that have. Back to Israel, and I'll close. Israel is apparently fighting, at least so far, fighting Hezbollah with much more of the so-called gloves off. They're actually fighting. And this will hopefully be a much shorter stint. The fact that there has been no ceasefire in Gaza should not surprise anybody, because the entire world, including the United States, has handcuffed Israel in the fight of that war, and there is no reason for Hamas to give up. They don't care that 40,000 or 20,000 or 10,000 people have been killed. They don't care. They actually have said publicly, the more dead people, the better. Our people are martyrs. They exist here to die for Allah and for the cause. They've said that. And you've got people like this gentleman, and I use the term loosely, who are defending that notion. And this is morally sick, and it only can lead to death and more destruction.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Michael, the salaries of these professors are paid for by the government, by the students, but by the students' parents also. So parents, consider, we're only showing a few minutes of this guy. You can find a lot more of him. Consider if that is the kind of person you want talking to your children as they become adults. If that is the first. That is a good first step into adulthood, or not. Daniel.
Well, first of all, we had someone in the chat saying something like we should be skeptical of Piers Morgan's interviews. I'm not really sure what he meant by it, because again, I have to stand by Piers Morgan. Whenever we want to discuss someone, it's oftentimes Piers Morgan has an interview that is pretty good when it comes to essentializing what the person wants to say. So it's always good to go through them. And he also doesn't strike us when we use his video. So it's always good that. And I also, many people who appear on his show do come back. So I assume at least from that sort of perspective, it makes sense for them to come back. So overall, it's something I'm willing to accept. But we also had, I think it was Supi Kask in the chat who was saying she brought up a case of Armenian genocide, which I don't know much about that one specifically, so I'll use a different example. But that's when it comes to sort of like, crying genocide almost at every stance, you are taking away from the power of the word. You are taking from the actual genocides that happen. And, the examples like, of course, the Holocaust and, for example, the Holodomor, they weren't just some sort of, nation is in a war and they killed a lot of people and somehow it became a genocide. No, it was a targeted, it was a targeted policy from the government, from top to down. You have documents, you have your historical records showing what was the intention, and that's the biggest part of the genocide. What is the intention? Again, if you can find anything similar to that when it comes to Israel, any sort of a leak, and we are living in the modern age, so it would be much easier to hear it now. Any sort of leak of a document, any sort of like IDF policy, any sort of, something coming out of the intelligence agency, anything that would basically show that there is this sort of goal of basically erasing the Palestinian population, then you could make a case for genocide. But there is nothing like that. It's again, what is actually happening? Israel is defending itself. Hamas is using basically more human shields than pretty much in any conflict we've ever seen, and still the casualties when it comes to civilian population are low when you compare them to any different conflict. So again, when you say Israel is committing a genocide, again, you have no proof for it. You have no documents, you have nothing to prove it. And again, and someone called me out before. I use again a lot, so I'll try to fix that. But again, I cannot use it without. He also mentioned the ICJ and the plausible case, which I wanted to mention. He is completely misusing what the word means. I tried looking up what were the other cases for when ICJ discussed genocide, or when genocide case was brought to it, and where did it go? So I think there were like 4 or 5 other cases with I think besides one, all of them had that plausible case. One later was ruled as a genocide, one later wasn't ruled as a genocide, and a few of them are pending. So using that sort of like, oh, it's a plausible case for genocide as like it is genocide. Again, if you take someone to the court and he is, let's say it goes to the court, meaning there is evidence basically that it can go to court, it's not dismissed, do you automatically assume the person is guilty? It's completely reversal of any sort of morality or justice.
Thank you, Supicast, for the super chat. Supicast asks, does he think Russia is committing genocide in Ukraine? Well, we're not going to get to that part, but the short answer is no. He is very much a Russia apologist. Do you guys have a few more minutes so we can do one more clip? All right, let's do it.
Systems around civilian locations. How else actually do you go after them?
Well, first of all, Piers, the idea that Hamas or Hezbollah represent an existential threat to Israel is not a serious argument. Just take Hamas, for instance. There's no way Hamas could capture for any sustained period of time territory inside Israel, much less threaten its survival. With regard to the fact that Hamas is interested in launching terrorist attacks against Israel, from Hamas's point of view, this makes perfect sense because the Palestinians are basically enclosed in a giant open air prison. And what they're trying to do is, in effect, break out of that open air prison. And one of the ways they do that is through terrorist attacks at Israel. And this, of course, is what happened on October 7th. October 7th happened in a vacuum. It's not like the Palestinians in Gaza were a bunch of Nazis who were just simply interested in crossing the border into Israel and murdering large numbers of Jews. The Palestinians were basically prisoners in this giant open air prison. And what they were trying to do was get out of that situation. And one can hardly blame them.
But it's not as simple as that, is it? Because Hamas
Right.
had power
Okay,
since
it
2005.
gets to more of that, but yeah, first of all, yes, Palestinians are just like the Nazis who want to kill all the Jews, and they themselves say that about themselves. So they're Western useful idiots try to tell us that what they say about themselves is not true. Then he goes into, he calls October 7th, he calls it terrorism, but he fully justifies it. So I don't know what that's worth, and yeah, there's more in that, but thank you, PC, for the super chat. PC says, Razi, this guy is 100% bad. I completely agree. Jonathan.
Yeah, well, if it is an act of legitimate resistance against this so-called open air prison, why didn't they go and rape the Egyptian women at the border, to get out of the jail? They have a border with Egypt as well. If their goal was through rape and murder to escape that jail, why wasn't that committed against the Egyptians as well? That's a question I would point to this gentleman. I'm sure it doesn't have an answer to that. One can hardly blame them, he said. One can hardly blame them for burning babies alive. How could you blame somebody for doing such a legitimate act of resistance? This person is evil. To say something like that is simply evil. You can't just, how can you take it serious? And Mr. Morgan is like, yeah, you can say that, I suppose. Like, babies were murdered, burned alive, women were raped. It doesn't care. And he says it's not an existential threat. It was an existential threat to these people. They died. They were taken hostage. They were burned alive. They were raped. What do you mean it's not an existential threat? Their existence was annihilated. The people of these of the border towns. So this person, I'm I'm lost for words, Razi. He's just evil. To say these things, you're an evil person. That's all I can say.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, I think the other interesting thing that came out of it, and really we shouldn't give these people any more airtime because they're despicable, was the notion that he said, and Hamas couldn't hold any substantial part of Israel for very long. Think about that, folks. So a little bit of rape and a little bit of dismemberment and beatings and torture, that's okay as long as you don't do it for very long. And if a few people die, that's all okay. I mean, he basically excused all crimes by Hamas because they would be temporary and not take over all of Israel. The last point I will make on this, gentleman, is that, and I'll go back to what I said before, the charter for Hamas states from the river to the sea, or thereabouts, and it talks explicitly about the annihilation of Israel. The fact that the entirety of Gaza, about all of Gaza, has been militarized. Think about it, folks. All your tax dollars, and a little bit of Qatar's and so on, but all your tax dollars that went in to help Gaza ended up building tunnels and missiles and IEDs and so on and so forth. This is enough. With the charter and with the fact that they acted upon the charter, that is enough for Israel to annihilate Gaza. Israel was provoked with a statement, and it was backed up by actions. I don't think you need more than a statement, but if you're going to tell me I want to annihilate you, I'm going to blow you away. And I think that's what you have to start with. And don't let some professor walk you down a pathway where just because they couldn't do it all at once forever, it's okay. Because that's a remarkably despicable argument.
Yeah, and in the parts we aren't going to get to, he also says that Iran is not an existential threat, and he says, "What do you think Hezbollah just woke up someday, something to that effect? Just woke up someday and decided to kill some Jews?" So yeah, he is a liar as well as evil, which kind of goes together pretty well. Daniel.
No, they didn't wake up one day and decided to kill Jews. They were preparing for a long time to go in and kill some Jews. I mean, they had the plans of where exactly to go. They knew where people would be. They knew exactly what the best day for that would be, what the best time for that would be to inflict as much damage as possible. It's not like, they really wanted to go fight IDF, but they just happened to find themselves in kibbutzim and just started killing civilians. No, they knew exactly where the armories were, so they could stand on top of them and kill anyone who would try to come close to defend themselves. Again, John Mearsheimer looks at the world conflict as it's a game of Mario Kart. Like, oh, if you are, for those who don't know, basically, if you are the first person, or if you are the last person, you get better power-ups, so you can catch up to the first people, and the first people get worse power-ups. So that's the way he looks at it. Like, oh, Israel is doing too good, so it cannot defend itself. because Israel is the most powerful nation in the region. I think he says it that Israel IDF is the most powerful military in the region. Because of that, it just cannot defend itself. There's no way, because unless you're facing existential threat, which again, Hamas is launching rockets, has been launching before October 7th every day, any chance they could. Similar with Hezbollah. Houthis have been attacking Israel. Iran has sent rockets into Israel. The only reason that this hasn't, in a sense, been existential threat is because Israel has capabilities to defend itself. But you being able to defend yourself against dictatorships, against nations attacking you, doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to get rid of the source. You always look at the source. You don't just defend yourself. Like, why should it be acceptable for Israelis to basically live in fear every day, just because some people in the region just want to attack it, but are not powerful enough to attack strongly?
Yeah, and you see the results of intellectuals like that in what you see in the wider pro-Palestinian community. One of our regular trolls in the chat says the Charter of Likud talks about the elimination of Palestine. Actually, until very recently, the Charter of Likud called for the creation of a Palestinian state. I remember that because that was the day they lost my vote. But no, this is, they'll say it. It doesn't matter if it's true. Just like the Al Ali hospital bombing, just like this is the entire Palestinian propaganda machine. They'll say it, and if it's not true, who's going to remember that part? Who's going to read the correction on page 17? Michael, you said we shouldn't give these people more airtime. I agree with you in theory. In practice, tomorrow's episode of the reality show will be talking about Gidon Levy. So, yeah, the problem is these people get airtime on.
No, I'm with you. I mean, people like Piers Morgan, as corrupt as he is, shouldn't give them more airtime. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and he's giving them airtime and not really challenging anything of what they say, which is a shame. But it gives us content to talk about. Thanks, guys, for joining me for a longer than usual episode of the reality show. Quickly, Jonathan, where can people find you?
You can find me on Substack at philosophyIneeded.com, link in the description.
Michael, where can people find you?
LinkedIn, Kaufman, 2Fs.
Daniel, where can people find you?
On YouTube, Damn Dan, and all the descriptions, all the links are in the description.
I'm Razi Ginsburg on X. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll be talking about the United Nations on the Daily Objective, Gidon Levy on the reality show. Yeah, so many despicable people, so little time, but we'll make time for them. Thanks. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.